I'm Brian, and I've been married to Emily for 4 years. We haven't had kids yet because, honestly, we're both still enjoying the freedom that comes with just being a couple. Maybe one day that'll change, but for now, we're content waiting until we're deeper into our 30s to even think about it. We both grew up in similar circumstances, just a few blocks apart, but we didn't officially meet until we were at a college recruitment event. Emily thrived in school. She became an accountant and credit controller, climbing up the ladder with sheer determination. Meanwhile, I struggled academically and didn't even graduate. But what I lacked in formal education, I more than made up for with hard work and an instinct for business. By the time I was 15, I was already working as a cleaner in local offices and stores. By 18, I had managed to grow enough that I was overseeing a team of 30 people and handling contracts with major companies around town. Emily and I crossed paths at that college event when she was on the hunt for a job, and I needed more hands for my growing business. She handed me her resume and, with a playful grin, said she wasn't really looking for a cleaning job but thought I might like her phone number instead. I didn't waste any time. I called her before she'd even made it to the next table and asked her to dinner the next night. 4 years later, we were married. Emily quickly landed a job at a construction firm and rose from the bottom to become the head of both the purchasing and credit control departments. With our combined incomes and no kids to look after, we lived comfortably. Meanwhile, my cleaning business continued to grow. I eventually bought out 2 of my competitors, making my company the largest in the city for office and store cleaning. In my line of work, it's not uncommon for cleaners or security guards to notice strange things around the office. It's part of the job, spotting the details that most people miss. About 4 months ago, while I was at my desk, my secretary told me someone was waiting in the reception area. She handed me a business card that read, "Kyle Thompson, Private Investigator." Intrigued, I asked her to send him in. Kyle came in, and after some small talk and a cup of coffee, he got to the point. He was working for a client who suspected his wife might be having an affair. According to Kyle, the wife worked as an accountant at Hancock Manufacturing, and recently, a new salesman named Jason Miller had joined the company. Jason had a bit of a reputation for targeting married women, sending them flowers, texting them late at night, and even taking them out to lunch. The kicker was that he was now pushing for an overnight trip with the client's wife. At first, I was mildly entertained by the spy game Kyle was describing, but then something clicked. Hancock Manufacturing was a company that Emily's firm sourced materials from, and this Jason guy sounded like someone I'd need to keep an eye on. I asked Kyle what he needed from me, and he explained that Jason was leaving personal items like flowers and notes on this woman's desk, which she usually threw away. If my cleaning crew could collect anything tied to him and pass it along, they could build a case. He assured me there was no legal issue, and the company had already given them the green light. I called the CEO of Hancock Manufacturing to confirm, and he immediately agreed. Kyle and I were now working together. My cleaning staff started gathering any personal trash related to Jason and handed it over to Kyle every day at 11 a.m. For 6 weeks, this arrangement continued, and eventually, Kyle's team caught the woman and Jason meeting up at a motel, leading to her divorce. It was a strange situation, but after that, things went back to normal for me, until something happened that shook everything I thought I knew about my own marriage. About a month after Kyle's investigation wrapped up, I noticed Emily seemed a bit off. She'd always been an open book with me, but lately, she was quieter, more distant. I tried to get her to talk about what was going on, but she just brushed me off, saying work was stressing her out. I didn't press her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A week or so later, Zoe, one of my longest-serving employees, came into my office. Zoe's been with me since the early days, and we're close. She's about 25 years older than me, and she's always treated me like a son. As soon as she sat down, I could tell something was bothering her. "You remember that case a few months ago?" she asked cautiously, referring to the investigation we'd helped Kyle with. I nodded, curious where this was going. "Well," she continued, "I work in the same building as your wife now, and I've noticed something odd." My stomach dropped. I asked her what she meant, and she hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I've seen that guy, Jason Miller, stopping by Emily's office," she said, her voice lowering. "The same guy we were keeping tabs on. I even saw him bring a huge bouquet of flowers to her desk, and she took them with her to lunch." Zoe handed me a card she'd found, and as I read it, my heart sank. It was from Jason, and the message was way too familiar for my comfort. "Dear Emily, Thank you for helping me renew my contract with your company. I appreciate everything you've done. Let's do lunch soon. With love, Jason. I couldn't believe it. The same guy who had wrecked another marriage was now working his charm on my wife. I thanked Zoe for bringing this to me and asked her to keep an eye out for any other notes or flowers she might come across. I didn't waste any time. I called Kyle that afternoon and filled him in on what Zoe had told me. Looks like your old friend Jason has found a new target. My wife, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Kyle sighed, clearly not surprised. You're the third husband who's reached out to me about him, Kyle replied. Do you want to join forces with the others? Absolutely, I said without hesitation. What's the next step? Kyle suggested we meet at his office with the other husbands to compare notes. The next day, I walked into Kyle's office and was introduced to Billy and Tom, two other men who, like me, had become entangled in Jason's web of deceit. Both of their wives had also been approached by Jason in one way or another, and they had similar stories: flowers, texts, lunches, and Jason slowly escalating the situation. We all agreed to work together, pooling our information to see what we could uncover. Kyle laid out a plan. Since I didn't have a cleaning contract at Hancock Manufacturing, where Emily worked, I couldn't gather any evidence from her office like we had with the last case. But Kyle had another angle. He asked me who paid for Emily's phone, and when I told him my company did, he suggested we monitor her phone activity. I signed an authorization form, and Kyle installed a program on her phone that would send all her messages, calls, and emails directly to his team. I knew it was a drastic step, but I needed to know what was going on. That night, I waited until Emily had fallen asleep, and then I quietly scanned the QR code on her phone. Once everything was set up, I went to bed, my mind racing. The next morning, Kyle called me with the first round of data. Brian, we've found something, he said, his voice grim. Emily has a separate email account, one she uses only to communicate with Jason. He's been pushing her, telling her she needs to spice up her life and try something new to improve your marriage. He's even been pressuring her to share intimate details about your relationship. Hearing this made my stomach churn. Kyle continued, he suggested a weekend getaway and told her that if she really loves you, it won't be considered cheating. He's manipulating her, Brian. He's trying to make her feel like this is normal. I thanked Kyle for the update and hung up, unsure of what to do next. I could feel my world crumbling beneath me. Emily wasn't just flirting with this guy. Jason was actively trying to destroy my marriage, and she was letting it happen. That night, Emily seemed even more distant than usual. She kept her phone close, and when I asked her how her day had been, she brushed me off again, saying she was just tired. At that moment, I knew I had to act. If I didn't do something soon, I was going to lose her. The next morning, I couldn't get the conversation with Kyle out of my head. Emily's behavior wasn't just distant, it was suspicious. That night, she went to bed earlier than usual, and I stayed up, trying to figure out my next move. I knew confronting her directly wouldn't work, not yet. Jared had his hooks in her, and if I came on too strong, I might push her closer to him. I needed more than just accusations. I needed proof. Kyle called me later that afternoon with more unsettling news. He had been monitoring Emily's communications with Jason and told me that they were planning to meet at a beachside restaurant for lunch the next day. Jason was pushing for Emily to discuss things in person and hinted at some grand plan. He had to convince her that their little affair wouldn't hurt me. His exact words were, "Brian loves you. If you're up front with him, it's not really cheating." The sheer arrogance of it made my blood boil. Jason was manipulating Emily into believing that what they were doing was harmless. And even worse, she seemed to be buying into his nonsense. I had to do something. I called Kyle again and told him I was ready to go all in. If I don't put a stop to this now, I might as well start thinking about divorce, I said, the frustration seeping into my voice. I need a solid plan, something that will make her see what she's doing before it's too late. Kyle was calm on the other end. Brian, if you're thinking about divorce, it's smart to have a backup plan. But even if things get messy, Jared won't give up easily. His ego won't let him. He paused, then added, if you're serious about ending things, I can start putting together a packet of evidence for your attorney. I thought about it for a second. I've already got a lawyer, I replied, trying to steady my thoughts. We have a business agreement in place that protects most of our assets, so if it comes to that, I'm ready. The next morning, I met with my lawyer to lay the groundwork. As we discussed the situation, he gave me a knowing look. "What's changed?" he asked with a raised eyebrow, like he already knew the answer. I gave him a wry smile and said, "Grace is on the verge of stepping out, and it's because of this salesman who's been feeding her a load of crap." I took a deep breath and continued, "If she goes through with it, there's no coming back for us." We spent the next hour going over potential outcomes. I had already taken steps to protect our business assets, and since we didn't have kids, there wouldn't be any complications with child support. We agreed on a simple divorce strategy: sell the house, split everything down the middle, and move on. As far as I was concerned, I wasn't going after Jason legally. That would be a waste of time and money. Once the legal framework was in place, I returned home with a plan in mind. Over the next few days, Emily's mood was all over the place. One night, she was affectionate, almost as if she were trying to convince herself that everything was fine. The next night, she barely acknowledged my presence. The tension was unbearable, and I felt like I was living with a stranger. Then, on Friday afternoon, Zoe, my longtime employee and trusted friend, called me at the office. She told me that Emily had received another bouquet of flowers from Jason, along with a card. It was the final straw. I was done pretending I didn't know what was happening. I immediately messaged Kyle in our group chat, where we kept all the updates from the investigation. Mark, Kyle's associate, replied quickly, "I'll check Emily's email now." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Kyle calling. "Brian," he said, his tone serious, "this just got worse. We found a hotel reservation for Emily and Jason. They've booked a weekend getaway at Lakeside Inn, about 30 minutes outside the city. They're planning to spend Friday and Saturday night there." I could feel my chest tighten. This was no longer a game of flirtation or stolen moments. It was real. They were planning to spend the weekend together, and I knew what that meant. Kyle continued, "There's more. We found emails between them, where Jason is giving Emily instructions on what to say to you, how to act to keep you from being suspicious. He's even got a script, telling her to be extra affectionate throughout the week to make it seem like everything's fine." I stared at the phone, struggling to keep myself composed. I had known something was going on, but seeing it all laid out like this hit me harder than I expected. That weekend, I played along. I didn't let on that I knew. Emily's behavior changed dramatically. She was unusually kind and affectionate, and we were intimate multiple times over the weekend. It was almost as if she was trying to make up for something, but I knew the truth. She was following Jason's script, making sure I was distracted while she prepared to betray me. By Monday, I couldn't keep it up anymore. I called Kyle and told him I was ready to act. "Jared's making his move, and I'm done playing along. Either I stop this now, or I'm filing for divorce." Kyle agreed. "I'll get the evidence together. You need to be ready for whatever comes next." The next couple of days felt like torture. I was watching my wife play both sides, trying to act like everything was fine between us, while knowing full well she had plans to spend the weekend with Jason. By Thursday morning, the tension in our house was unbearable. That afternoon, Kyle called with an update. "Brian, I've just intercepted a message from Emily to Jason. She told him she's in for tomorrow night and is excited for their little getaway." Hearing that confirmation was like a punch to the gut. Emily was still planning to go through with it. I thanked Kyle for the update, but deep down, I was fuming. I needed to confront her, but I didn't want to tip my hand just yet. I had to time everything perfectly. That evening, when I got home, I decided to take control of the situation. Emily came in carrying a few shopping bags, clearly not expecting what was about to happen. I greeted her with a smile, hiding my frustration. "I thought I'd make dinner tonight," I said casually, motioning to the kitchen, where I'd already started cooking. Emily looked confused. "I was going to make dinner," she said, setting her bags down on the counter. I could see the unease in her eyes. "We need to talk after we eat," she added, her voice a little too forced. "Of course," I replied, playing along. "We'll have plenty of time to talk." Dinner was tense, to say the least. We made small talk, but every time she tried to steer the conversation toward anything serious, I deflected. I could see the frustration building in her as the evening went on. Once we finished eating, I suggested we take our drinks into the kitchen, where I had discreetly placed a folder, the folder containing all the evidence I'd gathered. Emily followed me, still clueless. As she sat down, I pulled out the folder, revealing the papers underneath. "Emily," I began, keeping my voice steady, "there's something I need to tell you." Her eyes widened in confusion as I continued. "I've realized recently that our marriage isn't as strong as it once was. I've been thinking about trying new things, exploring different experiences." I paused for effect, watching her squirm in her seat. "Lauren, my secretary, has been confiding in me a lot lately. We've gotten close. So, I've booked a hotel for the weekend with her." Emily's face flushed red with anger. "Over my dead body," she practically shouted. "If you so much as—" She stopped mid-sentence, finally realizing what I was doing. I smiled, my expression calm. "Now you know how I feel," I said softly. I slid the folder across the table. "Go ahead. Open it." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the documents, emails, messages, photos. Every single piece of evidence, laid out in black and white. When she reached the end, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with disbelief. "You knew," she whispered. "Of course I knew," I said. "And if you go through with this, it's over. I've already spoken to my lawyer." She was silent for a long moment, her face pale. "Brian, I'm sorry." She trailed off, unable to find the words. "Sorry won't fix this," I said coldly. "You've been planning to cheat on me, and I've been sitting here, waiting for you to make your move. If you go to that hotel tomorrow, we're done." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running everything through my head: the betrayal, the lies, the fact that I had been one step ahead of her the whole time. In the morning, I woke up early and found Emily already in the kitchen, her eyes red from crying. She didn't say anything, but I could see the guilt written all over her face. I didn't bother asking her what she was thinking. I had already made up my mind. If she left for that hotel, there was no turning back. Around noon, Kyle called again. "Brian, we've intercepted more messages. Emily's having second thoughts, but Jason's pushing her hard. He's trying to convince her that this will bring you two closer." I let out a bitter laugh. "He's delusional," I muttered. Kyle agreed. "He's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. You need to be prepared for whatever happens next." Later that afternoon, I found Emily packing a small bag. My heart sank, but I kept my composure. I didn't say a word as she zipped up the bag and set it by the door. The message was clear: she was still planning to go. That evening, we barely spoke. She sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while I retreated to my office, trying to decide my next move. I had Kyle on standby, ready to serve divorce papers if she went through with it. Then, just as I was about to call it a night, I heard Emily's phone ring. It was Jason. She hesitated for a moment, then put the call on speaker. "Where are you?" Jason's voice was sharp, impatient. "I'm home," Emily replied quietly. "I can't do this, Jason. I'm not coming." There was a pause on the other end before Jason exploded. "Are you serious? After everything I've done for you? You're going to let your husband scare you off?" Emily stood her ground, her voice shaking. "I'm not doing this. It's over." Jason cursed and hung up the phone. Emily turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Brian. I made a mistake." The next morning, I told Emily that if she was serious about fixing our marriage, there were going to be some changes. First, she had to report everything to her boss and make sure Jason was banned from the office. Second, she had to delete the secret email account she'd been using to communicate with him. And finally, we were going to start counseling. To her credit, Emily agreed to everything. She called her boss that afternoon, and by the next day, Jason was gone, fired and blacklisted from the company. Emily deleted the email account, and we started seeing a marriage counselor. Over the next few months, we worked through a lot of the issues that had built up between us. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I wondered if it was worth saving. But slowly, we started to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. As for Jason, he didn't fare so well. A few months after he lost his job, I heard he had a bad fall at a local shopping mall, slipping down a flight of stairs in the parking lot. The police couldn't figure out exactly what had happened, but I knew there were at least 5 husbands who had been wronged by him, myself included. We were all there that day, wearing black jackets and baseball caps, but none of us said a word. It was just a coincidence, I suppose. Now, 4 years later, Emily and I are still together, and we're expecting our first child. We've come a long way from the brink of divorce, and our marriage is stronger than ever. I'll never forget what almost happened, but we learned from it. Sometimes, even when you think everything's falling apart, it's possible to pick up the pieces and build something stronger.